What if I left it all for pickles? To me, pickles are mediocre. To others, they are lifeblood, and I long for the vicarious experience of how they taste pickles. Yet it will forever elude me, for I am not them. I started thinking, is it truly my fault for not liking pickles? Is it the river's fault for not being as clear as a pool? The river might not be as clean, but it has its own beauty. So is it that I don't like pickles, or that I prefer rivers to the pools that we are sold? Are there better pickles? Could I make them? Could I bring the river to others? Could I make a pickle that is worthy to sit next to the pools on the shelves? They were simple questions, but for this one time I wanted to immerse myself fully in a thought experiment, with my full effort behind it. What would it look like, hypothetically, if I left my job, my degree, my passions, all for the noble pursuit of the pickle? The most important part of the pickle is the recipe. It's not that I dislike the pool, the vinegar pickle. We simply have neglected the river because the pool is so convenient. We think the only way to have a pickle is with vinegar, when there is another method, one that has been fermented. I'm no historian, so I will not speak to ancient Mesopotamian pickles, but a clear vinegar pickling brine was not the only method. The other and arguably earliest method was lacto-fermentation using lactobacillus bacteria. Think about the humble sauerkraut. Authentic kraut is fermented, and if you compare vinegar sauerkraut versus fermented, you will taste the difference. So then how come we are content with the vinegar pickles when there's a second method to explore? The answer is simple, because fermenting is difficult. Why is kombucha always refrigerated? Why do beer cans swell with barely contained pressure? Why is nearly every probiotic drink that isn't refrigerated alive? Because when you work with living creatures, they need to be brought to heal to be shelf stable. They need to be refrigerated. Vinegar is easily kept. Its acidity preserves the pickles, and its acidity prevents bacteria. If you go the extra mile and properly can, the contents will be sterile. They can sit at room temperature for months, or even years, and be perfectly safe to eat. In contrast, lacto-fermentation is difficult. Care needs to be taken in the early stages of fermentation. The jars are susceptible to mold if not kept airtight. More mold can grow if vegetables are not submerged, and fermentation can be hindered by thoughtlessly adding ingredients. Batches can become ruined, calm yeast can alter the flavor, and making a quality pickle is the last thought on your mind when you're struggling to just have an edible one. Going a step further, the fermented pickles will never stop fermenting. The bacteria will simply slow down when they get cold, but not stop. You cannot get a perfectly consistent pickle. Vinegar pickling isn't bad. I simply think the ability to also have a probiotic pickle that needeth not vinegar is superior. The acidity may not be consistent, but if you want it more sour, all you have to do is leave it outside the fridge for a bit longer. It trades consistency for customization. Now, how can we craft a quality fermented pickle? Before anything, we have to understand ingredient quality. A skilled chef can make a great dish with mediocre ingredients. That same chef can make art with quality ingredients. If we want the best pickle, we need the best ingredients we can get. So, I grew the cucumbers myself. After we have our cucumbers, we're going to want a wire glass jar. I get mine from IKEA for a steal of a price. We want these because even with mason jars, airlocks, or a well-placed lid, you can still get mold. We want it to be as airtight and reusable as possible. You can boil your jar if you're worried about sanitization, but do not use star sand if you are a fellow homebrewer. It cannot handle star sand. Star sand is too strong for this project. We will make the brine first. I'm going to use a recipe that I haven't quite perfected for this example, but at their core, all lacto-fermented pickles are the same. For lacto-fermentation, we need an environment that prevents harmful bacteria from growing, but allows our good bacteria, lactobacillus, to grow. We're going to use salt water to create that environment. We're going to measure our water and add 2% of that weight as salt. As a quick aside, many people will say to add 2% of the final weight of everything in the jar as salt. They want the weight of the water, plus cucumbers, plus seasonings, all measured, then 2% of that final weight added as salt. This method usually takes longer to ferment, but the salt won't be diluted by the cucumbers. I've tried both methods many times, and I've had more consistency with the 2% salt to only water weight. Next, we can add our seasonings now and even simmer them for a bit, or we can even age the brine separately before adding vegetables. You can also just add everything at once. I've been wanting to infuse my brine with oak chips, so I added all the seasonings first and then let the brine age. I also like to add cabbage to my pickles, because sauerkraut does not mold as easily as cucumbers do. I believe it's because cabbage has a higher sugar content and more natural bacteria than cucumbers. So I add cabbage to help the fermentation process along. For the pickle crunchiness, there are a few things you can do. One is make sure you cut off the blossom end of the cucumbers. I also like to add grape leaves because the tannins supposedly help with the crunchiness. In reality, I think it's actually calcium that affects the texture and firmness of the cucumbers. So things like dill seed, napa cabbage, kale, possibly the oak chips, and other high calcium vegetables. You should add a weight once everything is in the jar to make sure all the vegetables are fully submerged. I, however, will not. I will put on the flip lock and leave it in a dark location for roughly 5 days, taking it out every day to burp it, and then shaking it multiple times a day to mix up the brine and vegetables. What happens over these days of fermentation is the lactobacillus is eating the sugars in the vegetables through an anaerobic process and releasing lactic acid and carbon dioxide. This prevents undesirable bacteria and mold from growing. The lactic acid drops the pH, which prevents bacteria by making the brine acidic. The carbon dioxide fills the jar and forces oxygen out, preventing mold. Even with an airlock, I've had mold grow on unsubmerged vegetables, so you really want to use a weight to keep it submerged. Now, all that's left is time, and we have pickles. However, I'm not leaving it all to teach people how to make pickles. None of this works unless the pickles are worth buying. We need to understand the niche of lacto-fermented pickles and get some taste tests. I was on a call with a Canadian kombucha maker a while ago, and she introduced me to one of the only naturally fermented pickles that's sold in stores. Bubbies. I was lucky enough to find Bubbies in a local grocer. Anyways, these will be my baseline. Now we need to do some testing. I needed someone who is neither married to me nor extremely biased towards my projects to assist in a taste test. So I got my neighbor. For this video, we're going to call him Gavin, because that's his name.
Alright, so what do we have?
These are spear style.
Okay. Full on pickle.
Yep. That's good crunch, huh?
I can tell by biting into it that it's like in a brine instead of a vinegar.
Yeah.
Like it's very briny. It's not bad.
Yeah,
it's just different. It almost reminds me more of sauerkraut. If a pickle could be, it still tastes like a pickle.
Yeah.
But it's definitely like less pickly than you would be used to in a store, and like quite a bit different than Bubbies. I gotta take another bite of this.
Yeah.
It's a little more subtle. I think it still has a lot of flavor, but it's not like where the other one tasted super salty or briny.
Which I think is a perfect way of describing lacto-fermented pickles. Though, I would add, they almost have a floral flavor as well. But I enjoy lacto-fermented pickles more because I like that fermented sauerkraut flavor. He said our pickles were comparable, but in different niches.
The thing is, to me, like yours tastes a lot more like niche or specific. Like yours wouldn't be a general audience pickle. I would eat your pickle. I mean another one. Where the bubbies, I feel like
That classic sour
yeah,
kind of pickle.
it's not like yours is less of quality than bubbies. But bubbies definitely, I mean, they definitely haven't figured out they're doing it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, this is their lifeblood. I'm
Yeah.
sure they make other products, but like pickles with their
which is a huge compliment because Bubbies is being actually sold on shelves today, and my pickles were made in my closet. However, he brought up two very important points.
I would like to see you try the oak thing again,
Yeah, I think I need to do a lot more chips.
because I think if you're trying to stay in the nuanced space, you need to get the flavor more nuanced. As an average consumer who
Yeah.
just averagely eats pickles,
Yeah.
I mean, it would have to be in the right store. I'm never gonna go out of my way, like, unless a certain force of influence, like an influencer that I really like and respect in the food world, was like, these pickles are insane.
If I wanted to leave it all for pickles, I'd need the best pickles in their category. It should be almost questionless. The whole point of the recipe we did was to have oak-infused pickles, and none of the oakiness came through. If I cannot make the brine better, I shouldn't bother, because people will only go out of their way for the best pickles. I would have tried more recipes, but the growing season's drawing to a close, so I can't get cucumbers that are up to my standard for testing. We will have to say that this recipe is still a work in progress, but moving in the right direction. Second only to the recipe is the name that will be plastered to the jar. This is what people will remember, the word or phrase that will forever be associated with this pickle. This whole video, I've slowly been seeding this name into your psyche, preparing you for the great reveal. And we will call them River Toes! Okay, hear me out. Think about the conversations that will happen in stores.
We got lucky. I didn't think they'd have river toads here.
Oh, these are so good. Have you tried river toes?
River toes? What are river toes?
Oh, it'll be hilarious. I can already imagine the looks people will get. I do have a reason for deciding on river toes. Where vinegar brine is clear, fermented brine is hazy. What is the brine but the dew of a river? And what are pickles but toes? Okay, jokes aside. When I was first dwelling on lacto-fermented pickles years ago, I was tubing down a river in the heat of summer. As I was pondering pickles, I looked down and thought, what if I called them river toes? Like that, it was etched in my mind, and I've referred to them as such ever since. If we were to sell these, they would need more than a name. They would need a jar. I have 4 options to present to you that I've been mulling over. Classic glass, bamboo, wood barrel, and earthenware jars. Let's briefly go over each. Glass is great because you can see the pickles and the seasonings. My neighbor made a comment in our tasting.
But the things that immediately draw my attention to your jar, that I would be like, this is a win in your favor, is the extra contents of it. I would probably gravitate towards yours just because immediately it looks like there's a lot more and they're adding flavor to it.
Consumers, I'm talking about you and me, will decide at a glance if the contents look better than their competitors. However, glass is bland. What's the point of doing this project if I should make it bog standard? We want creativity, not the default. Also, I don't know, just think of all the glass jars being thrown away as a bummer. Bamboo is something I tested out forever ago in a short I made. Basically, it's a grown jar. You have to line it with wax, but after it's used, you can simply toss it and it will decompose. That way, my conscience is clear before God. But if we're talking about conscience, I would want to grow the bamboo here, and bamboo's invasive, so that's another bummer. Bamboo also has a high sugar content, so I need to either treat it or ferment the bamboo to prevent our jar from molding. In other words, that process would be expensive. Wooden barrels would be the coolest by far, but improbable. I won't go too much into it because I don't have footage, but they only crossed my mind because I'm trying to make oak-infused pickles, so I thought it was worth mentioning at least. Earthenware jars are the most exciting for me, as they are reminiscent of vintage pickling jars. I was so inspired by them, I took a pottery class to try to dial in exactly how I'd want the pickle jar to look. The pros of pottery jars are that they, in my completely biased opinion, look the coolest. If you glaze the jars right, and get the right shape, they become more than just a jar. They become artwork. The impression pottery exudes is that of warm, handcrafted, natural art. I think that fits with the idea of going with a natural method of fermentation. The cons are the same with glass for the most part. When you vitrify clay, you are following the definition of the word and making the clay more glass-like. Once it's fired, it will no longer rejoin the earth as it once did. Now that we have addressed the container, we need to talk about the lid and label. The label will follow the artwork I showed earlier, but in a wider format. The lid I would like to be cork, regardless of what jar option we go with. Mainly because it would be very easy to use recycled wine corks to make the lid. Okay, you got me. If I'm being real, I just think it looks sick. The next step was I had to figure out how we're going to seal the cork. Obviously, I had to use pickle-colored wax. I don't think I need to explain that any further. I made sure I had a thin wire wrap so that I could open the jar, and it worked well. I longed to have a finished model of what a jar would look like, but all my favorite packaging methods are on different models. The glazed pieces I made in my class all shrunk in the kiln and are way too small for a mock-up. I really like the wax strip I got in this blue jar from IKEA. The antique jar I got from Etsy looked nice, but the color didn't really work well with the wax. And this random candle had the perfect jar height to label ratio. So just imagine with me that the IKEA jar is taller, with the width of this candle, has the glaze of this jar, and maybe the shape of the antique jar, and I think we have our mock-up. I refuse to pay Adobe anymore, so I'm not going to be able to Photoshop that for you. And like that, I'm going to say that this counts as packaging and labeling done. Finally, we have to talk about the logistics of all of this. This part is discouraging, so I will bring up the biggest hurdles and then mention a plethora of considerations. Foremost, and above all, we'd have to think about how these would be sold and how we would get the jars there. Off the bat, it would be impossible to send pickles direct to consumer. Since these are fermented, they would need to be refrigerated, lest they keep fermenting and the jars explode. So for shipping, we would have to do temperature-controlled trucks delivered directly to stores. Preferably small, privately owned ones, within a certain radius. I'd probably get them up to Asheville too. Those little tow gremlins would love it. The point though was we would have local stores that people would have to travel to in order to buy the pickles. Going briefly further, the stores would then have to have refrigerated storage to keep excess stock, and then I would have to compete for refrigerated shelf space. Before even all of that, we'd have to make the pickles. Although I have all the equipment, since the pickles need to be refrigerated to be shelf stable, I could not produce them at home. Now, I'm no health inspector, but this is because cottage food laws specify what is needed for the product to be legally produced at a home, and the refrigeration aspect is what excludes me. So, I would need a commercial kitchen. There are rental kitchens available, but what I would really need is a fermenting space, not stoves and burners. I would need to purchase a location with 2 sinks in order to meet safety requirements. The final big logistical piece would be the ingredients. I'm the kind of person who would want everything done completely from scratch. I'd want to grow the cucumbers myself, the dill, get the oak myself, grow the seasonings, and do it completely in-house. The complications can be arranged in the same order. The cucumbers would have pests, specifically the dreaded squash vine borer. The dill's actually kind of fine. The oak would be sourced locally, dried and toasted. I could grow majority of the seasonings here except for black pepper, unless I want to get a massive greenhouse. Now, let's rapid fire some other logistics. We would need to figure out accounting and budget. We would need to figure out what to charge for the pickles, and realistically, these are going to be the most expensive pickles on the shelf. We would need to figure out how to communicate with our various grocery stores, and avoid EDI if at all possible. We would need to think about batch cereals and batch testing. We would need to change the label to meet requirements and include nutrition facts. We would then have to send these pickles to labs to get the nutrition facts in the first place. We would need a building for our required kitchen, and most likely brewery-style conical fermenters. We would also need a large refrigerated area, the bay door. Eventually, I would like to purchase land and build a permanent location, which I do have the perfect spot for. I could go on, but we will finish with the fact that logistics are tough. So, where do we go from here? Full transparency, I went into this video having no plans whatsoever to leave everything for pickles. But now, I still have no intention whatsoever to leave everything for pickles. I've put so much time and research into this project, so I understand just how much capital and time it would take to get this running, both of which I am in short supply of. Now, if for some reason you thought this harebrained concept of mine was exciting and are now disappointed, I will give you no glimmer of hope. Even if you cry out for my toes, I will not make them. You will never hear the indistinct babble of toes in the grocery store. You will never taste my toes. It was enjoyable doing this thought experiment, but what mattered to me most throughout this project was the question I asked at the start. If you remember, I wanted to know if I didn't care much for pickles, or that it was really the pickles we are sold that were the problem. And I answered that question. Pickles are fascinating. There are so many ingredients, recipes, and methods to explore. I can see how someone would get lost in it. But, to be honest, I just don't think I'm much of a pickle guy.